Okay, so right off the bat, I'm going to say that I'm not sure how exciting today's site visit is going to be, considering a recent analysis of TripAdvisor reviews named it as, I believe, the most overcrowded site to visit in Europe. Uh, Today, we're going to the Roman baths, well, at the British town of Bath. Now, trigger warning, I'm not going to affect a British accent, so for the purposes of this segment, it will be Bath and not Bath. Nevertheless, this was a pretty special site visit for me, considering I had visited way back in 2003 when I was a starving university student. And going back 20 years later and seeing some of the positive and negative changes to the site, that was quite a treat and quite interesting. Now, I have to say right away that I totally agree with that TripAdvisor analysis. This place was packed. As per my usual travel hack when going to very busy sites, I try to get there first thing at the morning, immediately as it opens. And for this site, to manage the crowds, the tickets are timed. So, even though it was a weekend and it was during the summer, which is, peak travel season, I have to say it was pretty packed first thing in the morning, even with the time tickets. I was stepping on a lot of toes. And being a nerd, I spent about 2 hours there. And by the time I left, it was like music festival level packed. And that did take away from the experience. The other thing I have to say is the price was exorbitant. Now, I got a student discount. And by the way, I love getting student discounts for things, well into my middle age. But anyway, I got a student discount of a whole British pound off the ticket price. That meant I spent £27 to get in there. At current exchange rates, I think that's about 35 US dollars. So that's a lot of money. There's not too many sites in the world that I've been to that I've spent quite that much. Maybe Petra, but not too many sites at that price. So it is very hefty ticket rate for, let's say, if you're going as a family with two children. Now, I know that does go to support the site upkeep and perhaps even future excavations, and there have been some recent excavations there, but still, those are the negatives: crowded and expensive. All right, so now that I've got those gripes out of the way and hopefully haven't scared you from going there because it is a legitimately great site, let's talk about the history and archaeology on site. So, what you see today is basically Roman and after, because this became a royal center and, was popular in Victorian times. So, what you're seeing is Roman up until the present day. But the site was in use in pre-Roman times, in Celtic times. At that time, there was probably a small temple there dedicated to the goddess Sulis, the Celtic goddess Sulis. Now, unlike the Romans or Greeks with their pantheon, standardized pantheon of gods, the pre-Roman population of Britain and northwestern Europe tended to worship local deities, and that's what Sulis was. Now, when the Romans came along and took the place over, they said, you know what? This Sulis character, she reminds us a lot of Minerva, or if you know the Greek pantheon, Athena. So when the Romans rolled up, they put their temple there and they dedicated it to the goddess Sulis Minerva, literally just merging the two goddesses' names. And voila, it was that simple. And what I find so funny about this is that's exactly what Rome would do again 6 centuries or so later. So what am I talking about? The Roman Empire collapsed, in the 400s, in the early 400s in Britain. It kind of disintegrated, things fell apart, and the island became pagan pretty quickly again. Now, there were still Christians, but they were isolated in small communities and more in the west and maybe north of the island, in today Wales or maybe, the north, like in Scotland. So the island became pagan and Anglo-Saxon. Now, once Roman power, not in the form of the Roman Empire, but the papacy started to be on the rise again in the early medieval times, they sent a mission to Britain, the Gregorian mission in 597. And that's when the island started to re-Christianize. So it was pagan from the fall of Rome until, it didn't start to re-Christianize till about the very early 600s. And at that time, with all these missionaries coming, they found these pagan places, let's say the Sacred Grove. And suddenly the Sacred Grove, dedicated to whatever local god or goddess there was, well, that became suddenly dedicated to Saint something or other. And perhaps Jesus had visited there. So they Christianized these spaces. And that's exactly what the Romans had done long, long before when they found these baths, for example. They took the pagan temple and they made it their own with the goddess Sulis Minerva. Anyway, being a superstitious folk, but who also knew how to have a good time, the Romans, they developed this site, seeing its potential very early in their occupation. Though Julius Caesar, prior to becoming the dictator of Rome, invaded twice in 55 and 54 BC, the Romans weren't really there to stay in Britain until 43 AD, when they invaded and set up their administration there. And why was Britain such a tempting target for these Romans? Well, other than the fact that they pretty much wanted to conquer everything they saw and everyone they met, Britain had a status as this mythical land beyond the sea. Any rising power who wanted to make a name for themselves wanted bragging rights as the conquered Britain. So you had Julius Caesar do that twice on his road to dictatorship. And then you had an emperor called Claudius do it. And that was in 43 AD. Now, Claudius was a very unlikely emperor who was seen as a weakling, and he wanted to legitimize his authority and show his power, so he launched an invasion. And it took Rome about 50 years to conquer most of England from their base in the southeast all the way over to Wales. And that, they never fully dominated a lot of the island. However, they built this bath and this temple in Bath in 60 or 70 AD. So pretty much it was like the first thing they did when they got to this part of Britain, well before they had subdued the whole island. And it's key to understand that the temple is the first thing they built there because they saw this location as special for sacred qualities, not geothermal ones from the beginning anyway. And it was at this temple where people deposited various what we call votive offerings in the waters. These are items sometimes of value that people deposit in holy waters for good luck and other prayer purposes. And this is something we saw long before Bath was built up and after. Have you ever heard of a wishing well? That's a tradition that goes back a really, really long time. How about the legend of King Arthur? What happened to his sword, Excalibur, after he died? It was deposited in the water. Now, always valuing their hygiene in addition to a relaxing and good time, the Romans built an elaborate thermal bath here. So they did exercising and grooming as well. And you could see this today too in some Jewish mikvahs. Those are spiritual baths that often have beauty parlors and other things connected with them. So it was kind of the same thing, spirituality plus leisure. At their apex, in addition to the grand temple complex, the baths included hot, cold, and tepid baths, rooms for lounging, massage, beauty treatments, even a gym. But as the Roman Empire went to shit about 350 years later, the site was abandoned, it silted up, it flooded, and then in the early medieval times, it was demolished, probably salvaged for its stone and metal. So those things were taken from the site and used to build other things. Nevertheless, the baths did come into use again, as Nennius, a 9th century monk, gives us the following description, and I'm going to have to read here. Surrounded by a wall made of brick and stone, and men may go there to bathe at any time, and every man may have the kind of bath he likes. If he wants, it will be a cold bath. If he wants a hot bath, it will be hot. Sounds pretty nice. So there was some sort of structure here, and the site did continue to be used as a bath. Now, after the Norman conquest, John of Tours, a confidant of the conqueror himself and also his doctor, did reestablish a bath there for curative purposes. And the site became popular ever thereafter with the royalty and the nobility, well into Georgian and even Victorian times. So, as the site continually was used and embellished and expanded over time, the fact that it was such a historic site was kind of taken for granted. Now, that changed when in 1878, the so called King's Bath sprung a serious leak. And investigations at that time found lots of Roman artifacts and structures. And at this point, the very beginning of sort of professional archaeology, investigations continued. There were excavations. And by 1883, the site was cleared of most of its later additions. And by 1895, most of the Roman temple precinct was uncovered. Excavations continued on and off for the next few decades, but those from 1969 to 1975 are particularly noteworthy. Now, a large portion of the western side of the site was excavated, and that basically completed our understanding of the site and its chronology. Those were led by Professor Barry Cunliffe of Oxford University. Even though he specializes in the Iron Age, he pretty much seems to be everywhere. Now, that's an exaggeration, but seriously, well into his 80s, the dude is still quoted about just about everything archaeology in Britain. Even in 2019, there were some excavations where they opened up a part of the site that had been first cataloged in the 1880s, but then backfilled. So that was opened up to be studied just a few years ago. As for the visit, the audio guide, which is included in the steep admissions price, is an absolute must. It's full of information, and there's always options to listen to more. Now, that goes along really well with the multimedia on site with lots of interesting displays. That combination of the audio and the visuals really brings it to life. And there are several levels on that audio guide, so they're tailored for different audiences. So it's kind of a crowd pleaser. Even for kids, it's an engaging visit. Going through the ancient parts of the site, it really is a labyrinth of a space. There's the Great Bath, there are changing rooms, the gym rooms, the back rooms complete with their original plumbing. So even if you're somehow not listening to the audio guide, it's going to take you quite a while to go through there. And the museum has some pretty amazing artifacts. Let me give you some of the highlights. There's the original face of a Roman temple, complete with the pediment and columns. That is topped by a pretty cool carving of a Gorgon face, a Medusa. But there's a lot more complicated elements of that, including tritons, dolphins, oak leaves, winged victories. All of that busy imagery is quite confusing and the meaning is still being debated, but the audio guide does a pretty good job of interpreting it for you. There's the gilded bronze head of a sculpture of the goddess herself, Sulis Minerva, which was discovered in the ground in 1727. And this is one of the highest quality bronzes ever found in Britain from the Roman period. Perhaps my favorite object were the curse tablets. Now, these are little tablets of pewter or lead that have prayers on them and that are rolled up. Now, their purpose is to curse people who had wronged the person praying. So they would be complete with the person's name who they wanted to curse, perhaps the little story of how they were wrong, and what the person was praying for in terms of retribution. Apparently, after the relevant prayers were said, the little tablets were rolled up and deposited in the holy waters. And why I love stuff like this is because you could see the people's daily lives and the petty little things that piss them off. And to be honest, they don't really sound that much different than us. There are other votive offerings as well, including statues, jewelries, other personal items. And these, along with some plaques and other carvings, teach you a lot about the lives of the everyday Romano-British citizens. The place is really overflowing with information. It's almost overwhelming. But again, it's there for the taking, and you can go as deep as you want, including with the audio guide. So it doesn't feel like trying to do the Met or the Louvre in a day. You can kind of skim, or you can stand there and really take it all in. However, even I, as a super nerd, probably only went through 60 or 70% of all the panels in terms of my reading. Not only was it information overload, but to be honest, the site, as the morning progressed, began to get very, very crowded, and I was sort of tired getting jostled by the crowds. Overall, I'd have to say this is probably one of the best presented archaeological sites I have ever visited. You really get a sense of the people who visited those baths, what they were doing there, and what their lives were like. And that's really what it's all about. There's plenty of scientific and archaeological information, and as I mentioned, all the multimedia really makes it come to life. The diverse array of finds really are a feast for the eyes and the mind. It's also nice to see how the site has improved over the last 20 years. To be honest, my memories from my first visit are not super clear, but from what I can remember, a lot more of the site is actually accessible to visitors than it used to be in the subterranean area. So that was really nice to see. My only gripe at all with the presentation is what you see is almost totally represented by the Roman period. There's very, very little there, just a tiny piece about the people who lived there pre-Roman times, the Iron Age people, or all of that happened after the Roman times. Basically, what you're seeing is 90% focused on the Romans. So it would have been nice to hear about how the site developed in medieval times and Georgian times, and eventually how it came handed down to us today. I bet there's a lot of interesting stories and written sources about that. And again, considering the hefty entry price and really the suffocating crowds, at least on a summer weekend day, that would lead me to give it a 4 to 5 stars overall, despite the fact that it was an amazing presentation. Aside from the baths themselves, Bath as a town is a really nice posh weekend getaway and scene of many a hen party. We saw tons of brides wandering around town at night with their entourages in various states of inebriation. The pump room, built in 1706 to allow the middle classes to sample those spring waters to drink, that was a nice posh place for afternoon tea. But like the baths themselves, the price tag let you know how special it was. For the teenage girl and everyone, there is the Jane Austen Center, as the author did spend a lot of time here, as it was a high society place and made it the scenes for some of her books. Also of literary note is the Frankenstein House, dedicated to Mary Shelley, who lived here for a time and wrote here. I didn't visit that one as it looked a bit campy, but you could check it out for yourselves. It's on the map. Of course, historic Bath Abbey, located just next to the baths, is definitely worth a visit, and at £6.50, the tour is much more affordable. Otherwise, the town is charming to walk around with the stunning Royal Crescent and Circus, Pulteney Bridge, and all of the various parks and squares. Definitely a romantic getaway. Located just under 2 hours from London by train, barring the frequent delays and cancellations, which don't even get me started. Again, it's definitely worth a visit, but given the cost, you'll probably want to save up and save it for a special occasion. So there you have it, the Roman baths at Bath, the site itself and the town. I would recommend. Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.